Our next speaker is from the Maine Fair Trade Campaign and will be speaking to you about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and whether it's really dead and these other unfair trade acts are going to go anywhere. So I'd like to introduce to you Cynthia Phinney.
Good morning, and thanks for coming out today to talk about all these important issues. As Lou said, I'm Cynthia Phinney. I'm the president of the Maine Fair Trade Campaign, which is a coalition of organizations, social justice, labor, faith, food, agriculture, and more, working together for fair trade in Maine and around the country, and working against initiatives that would undermine efforts for fair trade. The TPP has been in the news a lot lately, and over the past, as long as it's been around, a coalition has been growing to oppose it. I want to talk a little bit about why, about what that coalition has done, and whether that fight is actually over, as some have proclaimed, or not. First, a little more about our coalition. We formed in an effort which is successfully established here in Maine, the Citizens Trade Policy Commission, which the legislature established back in 2001 and which still exists to this day, assessing the impacts of trade and trade agreements on Maine and Maine's people. One of the things we do is make sure that there's testimony. The commission is taking testimony that reflects what is happening on the ground around those issues. Some of that information is the kind of thing that I'll be talking with you about for the next few minutes, and which we'd love to have you involved with. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership was negotiated in secret, as trade agreements have increasingly been. Only people who had access to it are primarily corporate interests. There are some others who have clearances to see and comment on parts of it, but as an illustration of how ineffective and undemocratic that so-called access is, the Labor Committee, who advises USTR, issued an official report. You can find it on USTR's own website, talking about the fact that none of Labor's recommendations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership were included in the final agreement, and that committee recommended, for that reason, not passing the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There were reasons for many groups with many interests to oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Groups as diverse as labor, digital freedom, food security, handicap disability rights. If there was a group fighting for rights and justice around any issue, there was a reason for that group to oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And those groups successfully built a global coalition over the years that the agreement was in negotiation that was strong enough that the conclusion of the negotiations was delayed for months, and then for over a year, and then finally was able to complete in February of this past year. But then when it came to Congress, there were not the votes yet to pass it. That's why it was not introduced. And to this day, there have not been the votes to pass it. And that coalition was strong enough that by the end of the US presidential race, all of the major candidates opposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership because they had to. So the current president-elect has promised to remove the United States from that agreement and to not ratify it. This has caused many to proclaim that it's dead. We don't think it's that simple. The Japanese government, I will say not the Japanese people, I've personally had the privilege of meeting and briefly working with Japanese activists working for the same values that many of us here work for, who oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But the Japanese government and trade negotiator still wants it to pass. One of the primary reasons, in addition to all of the interests of various groups, that this kind of agreement is dangerous, is that one of its key provisions grants new rights to thousands of multinational corporations to sue, in our case, the US government, but it would be the government of any country that was a party to the agreement, to sue the government before a panel of 3 corporate lawyers. Those lawyers can award the corporations unlimited sums, which in our case would be paid by the US taxpayers, including they can sue for the loss of future expected profits. They need only convince the lawyers on this tribunal that a US law or safety regulation violates their TPP rights, such as that they were discriminated against because this dam was granted a license to operate despite when they passed an environmental review. Therefore, this dam should be granted a right to operate, even though it didn't pass the environmental rule, or it's discriminatory. That's how far-reaching the rights of the corporations are to drain the treasuries of countries in their own interest, which is not in the interest of the people or the environment. These decisions by the tribunal are not subject to appeal, and the amount awarded has no limit. So you can imagine the amount of pressure that there is to pass this agreement and to grant these rights to corporations and undermine the ability of governments, including our legislature here in Maine and our Congress and Senate in Washington, to legislate and regulate in the interest of the people and the common good. So the president-elect has said he will pull out, but he has not said much about what he'll do instead. And he also hasn't obviously yet pulled out. And there's been pressure. The Prime Minister of Japan has met with him to talk about how much Japan wants the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm sure that other trade negotiators and governments will be reaching out to him as well. What he has said is that he would be interested in negotiating bilateral trade agreements with countries. What does that mean? It could be the TPP on 40 different plates instead of on one big plate. He has not said that he will negotiate terms of trade agreements that protect the quality of jobs here or anywhere else in the world. He has not said that he will remove the investor-state dispute settlement, which is the process that I just described, from agreements that he negotiates. He has not said that he will preserve the ability of our elected government to legislate in the interest of protecting the environment or other rights that we are able to take for granted currently in this country, including things like digital freedom, net neutrality, the ability for our legislature to decide to spend our tax dollars in ways that don't promote sweatshop labor or that do promote local jobs. All of this is at risk with trade agreements of any kind negotiated under this model. And that's what we've worked very hard against, and also to put out a vision of what trade might look like. On our table, near where some of you came in, we have rough drafts from 3 different organizations talking about what kind of trade agreement might actually work well for people and for the common good that we might be able to actually support. Until we have a trade agreement like that, we need to continue to come together to work to oppose those which set up systems of global governance. They are no longer just about trade. They are about who gets to make the rules of the economy. And then they are negotiated by corporations and in the interest of large corporations, multinational corporations. They get more rights even than domestic corporations to undermine things that our legislatures and governments might want to do. So I'd invite you to take a look and come talk with us over there. about more of what we're doing, about visions for fair trade, and about becoming part of this movement that we're all part of together, working to make trade work for people and for the environment. Thank you again for your time and attention, and I look forward to working with you on all the issues that we care about.